Hey guys, what's going on? John here, back again for another Magic the Gathering video. And in today's video, we've got another Commander deck tech. This time it is Vilis, Broker of Blood. So this deck I have actually had on tapped out for the last couple of months, actually nearly half a year now, ever since Core 2020 released, which I suppose is about half a year. And it is my most upvoted deck on Tapped Out, my most enjoyed. So I decided that since so many people seem to love it on Tapped Out, that I would put it on YouTube because I think it's a great deck for a deck tech. All right, let's start getting into the deck. So first of all, we've got the Commander. The Commander is Vilis, Broker of Blood. He's an 8/8 legendary creature demon that costs 5 black, black, black. You've got Flying. And you can pay 1 black and pay 2 life. Target creature gets -1/-1 until end of turn, and whenever you lose life, draw that many cards. So mainly he promotes a life gain / suicide black style strategy. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the term, it uses its life total as a resource. So it likes to pay its own life to get value out of it. So basically, rather than other decks which like to have their life total high, a deck like this doesn't mind getting its life total a little lower because they know they've been using it as a resource, which is especially reflected in the commander itself. You eventually win by locking out the opponent with incredibly strong demons, or a backup combo win condition that isn't really tutored for in the deck, but is in there because it synergizes with the deck pretty well anyway, which I will discuss later. Let's get into the main part of the deck with category number 1, which is our ramp. Seeing as we are in mono black, our ramp isn't exactly the greatest. Most of it comes from artifacts and creatures that double our mana, but we do have a lot of those in the deck. Starting things off with Burnished Heart. Burnished Heart can sacrifice itself for its casting. You have to pay its casting cost and then 3 more, and sacrifice it, and you get 2 basics onto the battlefield tapped. So this is great value. If you've only got 3 lands in your starting hand and a Burnished Heart, you know you'll be okay if you don't hit lands in your top decks, because on turn 4 you can just pay the 3 and sacrifice your Burnished Heart. You'll get 2 more lands to actually ramp you ahead of the curve, which is extremely nice. And even if you get this when you are on curve, it's very nice, and it's not completely a dead draw later in the game. Cryptghast is our next one, and he's actually very interesting, very strong in this deck. He's a 2/2 spirit with Extort, and it reads, whenever you cast a spell, you may pay white or black. If you do, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain that much life. Whenever you tap a swamp for mana, add black to your mana pool. Basically, it doubles the mana from all our swamps, and since we are in mono black, that is extremely strong for us. It also has the added bonus of having the Extort ability, which means that we get to gain extra life off of every spell we cast if we choose to pay the Extort cost, which is very, very helpful because we want to be gaining back that life we're losing. Next up, we've got Nirkana Revenant. It has the same general functionality as Cryptghast, except it costs 6 instead of 4. Whenever you tap a swamp for mana, add black to your mana pool, but you can also give it some sort of pseudo fire breathing effect. You can pay 1 black to give it +1/+1 until end turn, which can act as an alternate win con if you've got a lot of mana floating around. I don't recommend it though. He's mainly in here for his mana doubling ability. Next up, we've got Everflowing Chalice. It's a 0 mana artifact with multi-kicker 2. And it enters with a charge counter for each time it was kicked, and you can tap to add 1 to your mana pool for each charge counter on the Chalice. So this card is obviously very good. We want to be ramping a lot, and this seriously helps because if we play it on turn 2, it's a 2 mana mana rock that taps for 1. Not terrible value. Honestly, it's pretty on point. But if we go later in the game, say we've got 6 mana, we can tap 6 for an Ever-Flowing Chalice that now taps for 3, which is incredibly helpful in letting us get our commander out. Next up, we've got Extra Planar Lens. It's a very expensive piece of ramp, coming in at $39.99. It's a 3-mana artifact with Imprint. When Extra Planar Lens comes into play, you can remove a land you control from the game. And whenever a land with the same name as the imprinted land is tapped for mana, its controller adds 1 mana to his or her mana pool of any type that land produced. Basically, we're going to be exiling one of our swamps. Under this Extra Planar Lens, it doubles all our swamp mana. Simple as that. Expensive, but quite strong. Next up, we've got Jet Medallion. It's a 2-mana artifact that reads your black spells cost 1 less to cast. Very self-explanatory. Very good. There's a reason it's $19. It discounts all of our black spells. Most of the spells in this deck are black, so it's extremely helpful in this deck. Next up, we've got Mind Stone. It's a 2-mana artifact. You can tap, add a colorless to your mana pool, and you can pay 1 tap, sacrifice Mind Stone, draw a card. Again, 2-mana rock that taps for 1 is pretty great on curve. I'd say the norm is a 3-mana mana rock that taps for 1, so having 2-mana mana rocks that tap for 1 are quite strong. Plus, Mind Stone gets extra value by being able to draw you cards, so it's not a dead draw later in the game, it replaces itself. Next up, we've got Pristine Talisman. It's a 3-mana artifact that taps to add 1 to your mana pool, and you gain 1 life. So this is actually kind of bad in its mana producing abilities, but it also gains us life, which is very strong in this deck, which is why I decided to run Pristine Talisman over another card such as Darksteel Ingot. Next up is Soul Ring. You know it. It's the classic commander ramp. Pay 1, tap for 2. It's as easy as Soul Ring. We all know it. We all love it. It's in every deck we own that's not budget. Why not have it here? Next up, Thought Vessel. It's a 2-mana artifact that reads you have no maximum hand size, tap, add 1 to your mana pool. So it's already ahead of the norm by being a 2-mana artifact that taps to add 1 to your mana pool, but also it gives you no maximum hand size. With Vilis' card draw ability and the amount of life this deck loses sometimes, we can be forced to discard some pretty good cards when we don't want to. With Thought Vessel on the battlefield, that's not happening. We have no maximum hand size. Absolutely great. Next up, we've got Thran Dynamo. It's a 4-mana artifact that taps to add 3 colorless to your mana pool. So this one has a bit of explaining to do. I personally don't like Thran Dynamo in a lot of my decks, although tons of people do. Thran Dynamo, in my opinion, is often too expensive, and I want to be casting other spells for that mana cost. Or, honestly, for certain decks, 4 is the CMC of my commander. And I don't want to be running ramp on the same CMC as my commander, because after I cast my commander, I want to start casting spells that synergize with it, not more ramp. And so Thran Dynamo often doesn't do well for me. However, in a deck with an 8-cost commander, the Thran Dynamo means that at a base level, by hitting land drops every turn and playing Thran Dynamo on turn 4, we get Vilis on turn 5. That's actually pretty great for an 8-mana commander. So Thran is pretty good in this deck. Next up, we've got Worn Power Stone. It's a 3-mana artifact that enters the battlefield tapped, and you can tap to add 2 colorless to your mana pool. It's just good. It enters tapped, which is unfortunate, but the next turn you get to use it to add 2 to your mana pool. I think it's pretty good value. Finally, we've got Bubbling Muck. It's a 1-mana sorcery that reads, until end of turn, whenever a player taps a swamp for mana, it produces an additional black. So it's the black version of High Tide. We pay 1 mana, and all our swamps double their mana until end of turn. This is really good, and it's a really good and underappreciated card. In mono black, this card is killer. It advances your mana so quickly. It also gives us a turn 5 Vilis, if all our lands are swamps. So, obviously, Bubbling Muck is a great card, and I definitely recommend it that you run it in all your mono black decks. Next up, we've got our second category, which is gaining life. Since we're going to be paying so much life, we want to gain some back. Our first way to do this is Blood Artist. It's a 2-mana creature. Whenever it or another creature dies, target player loses a life and you gain life. Simple as that. Your creatures die, you drain your opponents for 1. A lot of the times we will have creatures dying to sacrifice abilities or to our opponents. So this is just some good incidental life gain. Next up is Diamond Mare. It's a 2-mana 1/3. When it enters the battlefield, choose a color. Whenever you cast a spell of the chosen color, you gain a life. It's a 2-mana creature, so pretty decently low on our curve. And whenever we cast a black spell, we gain a life. So honestly, pretty good value. I think it's an underplayed card in monocolor, and in a deck like this, it's pretty good. Next up, we've got Kokusho, the Evening Star. It is a big boy. It is a large 5/5 dragon, which your opponents will have to answer immediately when it enters the battlefield, but when it dies, each of your opponents loses 5 life. So that's already brutal in a 4-player commander game, because that's a 15-point life swing. And then you gain life equal to the life lost this way, meaning you'll be gaining 15. It's a 30-point life swing. Not to mention more fuel for your deck, because for this deck, life is often treated as mana, basically. The more life you have, the more spells you can play, the more cards you can draw, the more stuff you can do. So Kokusho is extremely, extremely strong in this deck. It puts your opponents in a lose-lose situation every time you cast it. Next up is Polluted Bonds. It's a 5-mana enchantment. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your opponent's control, that player loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. That's pretty strong. I mean, it's $23. Definitely not the cheapest card I've ever seen. But, in my opinion, quite strong. It's a landfall trigger that makes your opponents drain themselves for 2. Next up, we've got Palace Siege. It's 5-mana enchantment that has us choose Khans or Dragons. And Khans reads, at the beginning of your upkeep, return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. And Dragons reads, at the beginning of your upkeep, each opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. I seriously enjoy the versatility of this card in the deck. This card is great because we get to return creature cards from our graveyard to our hand if we need to, but also we can have each of our opponents lose 2 each turn and us gain 2 each turn, which fuels our deck. Very versatile card in this deck. I enjoy it. Next up is Aetherflux Reservoir, or the Zap Cannon as many know it. It's 4-mana artifact. Whenever you cast a spell, you gain 1 life for each spell you've cast this turn. Pay 50 life. Aetherflux Reservoir deals 50 damage to target creature or player. It's a big boom cannon. It's the Death Star laser beam. It's the best storm card that doesn't read storm. It's just really good. We gain tons of life if we cast multiple spells a turn. And if we eventually get to a high enough life total, we can just zap cannon an opponent in the face, and it's basically guaranteed to kill. Next up is Basilisk Collar. It's a 1-mana equipment with equip for 2. Equipped creature has Death Touch and Lifelink. Really nice if we equip this to our commander, because that's a 16-point life swing every time he attacks. Not to mention Death Touch, which means blocking him, not so great for our opponents. So Basilisk Collar is a great way to get other life gain while also helping pose a serious threat with one of our creatures. Next up is Fountain of Renewal. It's a 1-mana artifact that reads, at the beginning of your upkeep, you gain 1 life. Pay 3, sacrifice it, draw a card. So the second ability isn't as relevant, but basically we just gain a life on the upkeep for just 1 mana. I think that's pretty good value, and also that sacrifice ability, it's very nice because if we get board wiped or if we don't need the life gain anymore, we can get some card draw if we're in a pinch. Next up is Trading Post, which is such a versatile Magic card. I put it in my Corvold deck tech because it's good with sacrifice synergy, but it's also good with gaining life and paying life synergy, because you can pay 1, tap it, discard a card, and gain 4 life, and pay 1, tap it, pay a life to create a 0/1 goat. Honestly, the other two abilities aren't as strong, but in this deck at least. Um, but the first two are very good and very worth it for this deck. Discarding cards, we can discard excess lands to gain some life, and then we can pay some life, which is good with our commander, and make some sacrifice fodder tokens. Next up, we've got Venser's Journal. It's a 5-mana artifact that reads, you have no maximum hand size. At the beginning of your upkeep, you gain 1 life for each card in your hand. So it seriously incentivizes us drawing lots of cards, which our commander loves. Again, it stops us from having to discard the hand size and gains us a ton of life to fuel our commander. Overall, a very deadly card in this deck. Next up is Whip of Erebos. It's a 4-mana legendary enchantment artifact. Creatures you control have lifelink, and you can pay for return a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield, gains haste, and it gets exiled at the beginning of the next end step, basically. This card is great. It reanimates a creature for 4 mana. It also gives our creatures lifelink, meaning we can swing in basically whenever we want, gain a ton of life, which just fuels our commander, in the same way as Basilisk Collar does. So I seriously enjoy this card in this deck. Next up is Category 3, which is paying life. It's what this deck wants to do most, and so we've got a lot of cards that do it. First up is Doom Whisperer. It's a massive demon. It's a 5-mana 6/6 flying trample. You can pay 2 life and surveil 2. So this is a huge threat in the air with trample that our opponents will have to deal with, but also we can instant speed, surveil away bad cards we don't want, and pay life at the same time, which draws us some great cards. So honestly, Doom Whisperer seriously synergizes with this deck a lot. Next up, we've got Carrick, Son of Yawgmoth. It's a 2/2 legendary creature that costs 4 and 3 Phyrexian black mana. And you basically, each black mana symbol in mana costs that you pay now becomes a Phyrexian mana symbol. It's also got lifelink, and whenever you cast a black spell, put a +1/+1 counter on Carrick. So Carrick is really good because it discounts all our spells. Not only that, but we pay life instead of it, which draws us cards with Vilis. Carrick, obviously a very strong card. We've known that for a while, but even better than in most places in this deck. Next up, we've got Erebos, God of the Dead. I know Theros Beyond Death just came out, but this is the original Erebos. It's a 4-mana 5/7 indestructible god. And it's got the normal god text, devotion to black is less than 5, it's not a creature. Your opponents can't gain life. You can pay 2 life, and draw a card. So we pay basically 2 mana and 2 life to draw 3 cards. Sounds like a great investment to me every time. Next up is Greed. It's a 4-mana enchantment that reads, pay 1 black, pay 2 life, draw a card. It's 1 mana, 2 life to draw 3 with Vilis out. That's just great. I seriously enjoy that card. Next up is Phyrexian Reclamation. It's a 1-mana enchantment that reads, pay 2 life, return target creature card from your graveyard to hand. So you basically pay 2 mana and 2 life to draw 2 and return a creature from your graveyard to your hand. Most of the time it's going to be a huge threat, so Reclamation is obviously really good in this deck specifically, although it is great in other decks too. Next up is Bolas's Citadel. It's a 6-mana legendary artifact. You can look at the top card of your library at any time. Obviously pretty nice. You can play the top card of your library. If you cast a spell this way, pay life equal to its CMC rather than pay its mana cost. And it can tap, sack 10 non-land permanents. Each opponent loses 10 life. This is great, obviously. It allows us to pay life instead of mana costs for stuff on top of the library. Really, really, really good. I seriously enjoy having Bolas's Citadel in this deck. It's often used as a combo-y card. That's not the intention in this deck. The intention is just to get card draw and value off of this card. Next up is Ad Nauseam. People hate this for being a combo card too, but in this deck, it's literally just extra card draw. It's 5 mana instant. Reveal the top card of your library and put that into your hand. you lose life equal to its CMC, and you can repeat this process any number of times. So you pay a ton of life and draw a ton of cards with ad nauseam. Just all around fun. Next up is Necrologia. It's a 5 mana instant. Play Necrologia only during your in step. As an additional cost to cast Necrologia, pay any amount of life, draw cards equal to the amount of life paid this way. So we can pay a ton of life for 5 mana and draw a ton of cards. Obviously, it sucks we have to do this on in step, so we do have to discard. But if we have any of our no maximum hand size stuff, it's not an issue. This card is honestly great. It's a more budget version of Ad Nauseam, in my opinion, but we've got both in the deck because they're both just so good. Category 4 is it's just a 3-card category, but it's card draw. First up, we've got Bloodgift Demon, who's a 5/4. He's a 5 mana, 5/4 with flying. Beginning of your upkeep, target player draws a card and loses the life. So we can draw an extra card, lose an extra life, which basically equates to drawing 2 extra cards per turn. That's pretty good. Harvester of Souls is a 6 mana 5/5 Death Touch. Whenever another non-token creature dies, you may draw a card. Our creatures die, draw a card. Opponents' creatures die, draw a card. It's pretty good in my opinion. Just kill a bunch of stuff, sacrifice a bunch of stuff, draw a bunch of cards, pay a ton of life, laugh at your opponents as they cower in fear of Vilis. Next up is Phyrexian Arena. It's a 3 mana enchantment that does the same thing as Bloodgift Demon, basically. So we've already basically gone over it. It's just cheaper and harder to remove, in my opinion, better. So yeah, it's just a very fun card all around. Category 5 is our finishers. So these are the cards that are going to finish the game for us. So all of our other cards are drawing us cards, getting us incidental value. These are the cards that are going to come in and say, okay, now I win. First up is Archfiend of Depravity. It's a 5 mana 5/4 flyer. At the beginning of each opponent's end step, that player chooses up to 2 creatures he or she controls, then sacrifices the rest. Basically, you only get 2 creatures if you're one of my opponents. That's what this card reads. So it's so good, especially against go-wide token decks. The token decks get screwed against this card. Absolutely ruined by Archfiend of Depravity. Next up, we've got Geth, Lord of the Vault. 6 mana 5/5 Intimidate. You can pay X and 1 black, put an artifact or creature with CMC X from an opponent's graveyard onto the battlefield under your control tapped, then that player mills X. This is so good. So we get to steal a creature from an opponent's graveyard, or an artifact if we want a cool artifact, and then that player has to mill themselves a ton. Sometimes, obviously, this can be bad if our opponents are playing graveyard strategies, but often the mill will hurt them more than it helps them. Next up is Grave Titan. It's a 6 mana 6/6 Death Touch. Whenever it enters the battlefield or attacks, you create 2/2 zombies. Wait, 2/2 zombies. That's a lot of 2s. Yeah, Grave Titan just creates a ton of zombies just to swarm your opponent, and it gets out of control really, really easily. Next up is everybody's favorite Theros Beyond Death reprint. It's Gary himself, Grey Merchant of Asphodel. It's 5 mana 2/4, and when Gary enters the battlefield, each opponent loses X life, where X is your devotion to black. You gain life equal to the life lost this way. This is a very infamous finisher. Famous, I guess, but more people hate it than love it, in my opinion. I love the card. But basically, it just drains your opponents for tons and tons of life. It can easily work as a finisher, plus it gains us life, so we also get to have more life as a resource for Vilis. Next up, we've got Psychosis Crawler. It's a 5 mana star. That is the weirdest thing I think I've said this video, which is impressive. Psychosis Crawler's PT are each equal to the number of cards in your hand. Whenever you draw a card, each opponent loses 1 life. This is pretty brutal, because we're going to be drawing a bunch of cards, so I don't think Psychosis Crawler ever really dies. Plus, draw cards, each opponent loses life. With the amount of cards we draw, This is brutal for our opponents. It ruins them. I mean, it's obviously good normally, but in this deck, it's just so good. The opportunity is so great with this card. This is probably the best card in the main deck. Next up is Sepulchral Primordial. It's a massive 5/4 Intimidator that costs a massive 7 mana. And when it ETBs, you get one creature from each opponent's graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. That's really good. You get to steal creatures out of your opponent's yards. Fine by me. And yeah, it's also a massive beater with Intimidate too. I see nothing bad about this card in this deck. Next up is our Praetor for the deck, Shieldred, Whispering One. It's a 7 mana 6/6 Swamp Walk. That's huge. At the beginning of your upkeep, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Wow, that's insane. At the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, that player sacrifices a creature. Oppressive, value generating, evasive. Everything's so good about this creature. Why would you not want to play it? There's a reason it's $17. People sleep on this card too much. Shieldred is really good. It's definitely worth playing in this deck. Next up is Army of the Damned, my sort of fun meme card for this deck. This is a bit of a joke card, but it's hilarious if you can pull it off. It's an 8 mana sorcery that reads, create 13 tapped 2/2 black zombie creature tokens. It's got flashback for 10 mana. It just creates a ton of zombies. That's all I'm going to say about it. It's hilarious. I guess have fun if you like playing stupid big dumb spells. This spell is right up your alley. Next up is Bond of Agony. This is a fun card. It costs black X as an additional cost to play Bond of Agony. Pay X life. Each other player loses X life. So you take your opponents down with you. This spell basically decides we're all going to lose a ton of life. This deck likes losing life. Your opponents don't. And plus, if you are at a high enough life total and you've got enough mana, this can just outright kill all 3 of your opponents. Very, very fun. Next up, we've got Command the Dreadhorde. It's a 6 mana sorcery. You basically get any number of creatures and planeswalkers in graveyard. Command the Dreadhorde deals damage to you equal to the total CMC of those cards, and you put them all on the battlefield. So you pay a ton of life, basically, which means drawing a bunch of cards, get tons of creatures, and planeswalkers too, from graveyards to the battlefield, and it just puts you in a position to win the game so easily. It stops your opponents from really doing anything. Overall, this is just such a good card in this deck. It's so much better than it is in any other deck. And in other decks, it's still really, really good. Next up, we've got Exsanguinate. It's a sorcery that costs X black black. Each opponent loses X life. You gain life equal to the life lost this way. This card is really, really good. It gains us a ton of life. Your opponents lose a ton of life. It puts us in a very threatening position on the game because all our opponents are at very low life totals, and now you are at a very high life total, and you're able to use that life total as a resource to fuel the commander. Next up, we've got Rise of the Dark Realms. This is one of my favorite finishers in black. It's a 9 mana sorcery that reads, put all creature cards from all graveyards onto the battlefield under your control. It's a mass grave recursion spell with no strings attached. None at all. Each other recursion spell in this deck has strings attached. Rise of the Dark Realms, nope. It's just a cool 9 mana, but if you can get up there, you're winning the game most of the time you cast this card. You just are. Next up, we've got Torment of Hailfire. This reads, it's a sorcery that reads, repeat the following process X times. Each opponent loses 3 life unless that player sacrifices a non-land permanent or discards a card. Our opponents lose a ton of life. They have to sacrifice stuff, they have to discard stuff. It denies them resources and forces them to lose life. If we get enough mana, this just outright kills them too. Or just makes them sacrifice their whole board, discard their whole hand, and then live it very little life. This card is seriously amazing. Next up is Liliana of the Dark Realms. It's a 4-mana planeswalker that starts at 3 loyalty. +1, search your library for a swamp, reveal it, put it in your hand, then shuffle your library. Its card selection gives you more mana into your hand if you need it. -3, target creature gets +X or X+X or -X until end of turn, where X is the number of swamps you control. So it's a huge payoff for all those swamps you're getting. Obviously, in a mono black deck, this is great. And then -6, you get an emblem with swamps you control have tap, add black to your mana pool. It quadruples your swamp mana for its -6. This card is such a payoff for mono black. If you need an incentive to go mono black, look no farther than this Lily, because she decides that anyone who goes mono black gets rewarded handsomely with a massive amount of mana, a removal spell on a stick, and some land tutors if you need it. Next up, we've got Category 6, which is removal. First up, we've got Cavalier of Night. It's a 5 mana 4/5 with lifelink. When it ETBs, you can sack a creature and destroy a creature an opponent controls. When it dies, you can get a creature with CMC 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. So it's got lifelink. This is great because it swings in, deals damage, you gain the life back. You can destroy a creature, and it's got recursion when it dies. So it does three things that are honestly really good for this deck. Next up is Noxious Gearhulk. It's a 6 mana 5/4 menace. When it ETBs, you can destroy another target creature. If a creature is destroyed this way, you gain life equal to its toughness. So it's a removal spell on a stick. It's an evasive large creature, and you gain life to fuel Vilis. I seriously enjoy having the Gearhulk in this deck. Next up is Font of Agonies. It's a 1-mana enchantment. Whenever you pay life, put that many blood counters on Font of Agonies. Pay 2, remove 4 blood counters from Font of Agonies, destroy target creature. This card is such a payoff for paying life. We pay life, we get blood counters, we destroy creatures. With the amount of life this deck pays, it's going to be near impossible for your opponents to have creatures on board. And all of this for 1 mana and then 2 mana per activation. That's some insane value on this enchantment. 49 cents, people are sleeping on this card. Next up is Force of Despair. It's a 3-mana instant. If it's not your turn, basically you can exile a black card from your hand rather than paying the mana cost, and destroy all creatures that enter the battlefield this turn. Although it's got text that makes it seem like a board wipe, it's actually much more like single target removal because you just target the creature that enters the battlefield this turn. So it's not necessarily a board wipe. It's more of a removal spell. Next up is Go for the Throat. It's a 2-mana instant that reads destroy target non-artifact creature. It's honestly a really, really good removal spell. Hits basically every creature for 2 mana. Nothing bad about it. Next up is Vraska's Contempt. It's a 4-mana instant. Exile target creature or planeswalker. You gain 2 life. You exile a creature or planeswalker, dealt with completely, and you gain some life. Not bad. Next up, we've got Category 7, Wraths. Our first one is Damnation. It's a 4-mana sorcery. Destroy all creatures. They can't be regenerated. It's a Wrath of God in black. This card is just so good. There's a reason it's $30. If you're running a mono black deck, any deck that runs black, basically, just play Damnation. It's just that good. Next up is Dead of Winter. It's a 3-mana sorcery that reads all non-snow creatures get -X until end of turn, where X is the number of snow permanents you control. So you may be wondering, why is this in the deck? Well, my simple answer is all of our swamps are snow-covered swamps. You see, I made the decision to run all snow-covered swamps in the deck for this one payoff here, Dead of Winter. It becomes basically a 3-mana board wipe, which is so good. So I seriously enjoy having this in. It's definitely worth getting the Snow-Covered Swamps to play this card. Next up is Killing Wave. It's a sorcery that costs black and X for each creature its controller sacrifices it, unless he or she pays X life. So this X is a finisher and a wrath. A lot of times your opponents are going to have to sacrifice the majority of their creatures or be forced to take insane amounts of damage, and then we just end up finishing them off with our big creatures. So it's a great wrath for this deck. Next up is Mutilate. It's 4 mana sorcery. All creatures get -1/-1 until end of turn for each swamp you control. It's basically Dead of Winter, but it doesn't read exactly the same, but it functions the same way, just for 1 more mana. I enjoy having it in this deck. Then we've got Toxic Deluge. It's a 3 mana sorcery that reads, as an additional cost to cast Toxic Deluge, pay X life. All creatures get -X/-X until end of turn. This is so good in the deck. Toxic Deluge, first of all, is one of the best board wipes ever printed. Second of all, we love paying life. Those two combined make this card really, really good for this deck. We just pay a ton of life, kill all the creatures on the board, and draw a ton of cards if Vilis is out. Our 8th category is our backup win con, which is our combo. It's Exquisite Blood and Sanguine Bond. Basically, whenever an opponent loses a life, we gain that much life, and whenever we gain life, target opponent loses that much life. So all we need to do is gain life once, and then it sets off an infinite chain reaction that kills all of our opponents infinitely. Infinite kill. This combo is a bit degenerate, but seeing as it makes us cast 2 5-mana enchantments that have to stick around, I don't think it's that bad, and it's definitely not competitive level, so I stuck it in here as a fun alternate win con. You can take Exquisite Blood out, or Sanguine Bond, but both of them are actually just good if you play them on their own in this deck. Category 9 is Protection for Vilis. We just have Lightning Greaves. It's a classic 2 mana equipment, equip 0, a creature has haste and shroud. It protects Vilis from our opponent's removal and gives it haste, which can be really nice if we want to kill with commander damage. Just needed a way to protect Vilis, so the Greaves are the best way. And then we've got category 10, which is our lands. We will go through these pretty quickly because I know this video is getting long. Got an Ancient Tomb. Tap, add 2, colorless. It deals 2 damage to you. 2 for the price of 1 is all I'm saying. And then 2 cards drawn. That's pretty good. Arcane Lighthouse taps to add a colorless, and you can pay a colorless and tap it until end of turn. Creatures your opponents control lose Hexproof and Shroud. It just allows us to target things that have Hexproof and Shroud, which can be really helpful. Next up, we've got Cabal Stronghold. Taps for a colorless, and you can pay 3 and tap it to add black for each basic swamp you control. They put the word basic in here to nerf it and to not make it a second copy of Cabal Coffers, but we're going to be having so many basic swamps that it's generally going to be generating a lot of value for us. So I like having this card in here. Next up, we've got City of Brass. Whenever you tap it, it deals 1 damage to you. You can tap it to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. So you may be asking, why do you need this? This is a monocolor deck. Well, that's simple. You add a mana and draw a card every time. For the price of 1 life, that's so good. So Mana Confluence also does the same thing, basically. You tap, pay a life, add 1 mana of any color. They both are basically there. You add black and draw a card with Vilis. So these lands are like so slept on in a deck like this. I guarantee you nobody else is thinking of adding City of Brass and Mana Confluence into their monocolored deck. But we are over here at the Slycore 01 channel because I'm smart like that. No, I'm kidding. Glacial Chasm has cumulative upkeep, 2 life. When it comes into play, you sack a land. You can't attack. All damage dealt to you is reduced to 0. So some kind of big downsides, but the cumulative upkeep of paying 2 life, then 4 life, then 6 life, on and on and on, 2 more life each turn, actually is great for us because we draw cards. So it's definitely worth having this out to draw all the cards. Plus, we can just sack it to its cumulative upkeep whenever we want, if we want to attack, or if we want to stop losing life. So, not bad. Next up is Nykthos. Shrine to Nyx. Taps to add a colorless. Pay 2, tap it, choose a color, add to your mana pool an amount of mana of that color equal to your devotion to that color. So we can basically pay 2, tap it to get a ton of mana equal to the amount of black pips we've got on the battlefield. Even with Vilis, we're just we at a base level we filter our mana, but we're guaranteed to have other stuff. And so Nykthos is always going to be worth having around. And next we've got Reliquary Tower. It reads, you have no maximum hand size, tap, add colorless. It's another redundancy on no maximum hand size with Vilis, because we know we like this, and it taps for a colorless. It's pretty good. Finally, we've got Cabal Coffers. It's got pay 2, tap it, add black for each swamp you control. Adds a ton of black mana to your mana pool. There's a reason it's $60, and that's because of Urborg, Tomb of Yawgmoth, which reads, each land is a swamp in addition to its other types. So this combo means that even all of our non-basic lands are going to be swamps, and so it makes Cabal Coffers even better than it normally is. We've also got 26 snow-covered swamps that cost 59 cents each. I realize I forgot to do to tell you how many, but there are in fact 26. If you want to know how many basic lands there are, and the reason they're a little expensive is because there's the snow-covered ones, which is a sacrifice we're willing to make to play Dead of Winter. If you would like to play normal swamps, you do need to find another card to add instead of Dead of Winter, but it will make the deck a little cheaper. So wrapping up this deck tech, what do I like personally about this deck? It's a deck I don't usually play. I don't usually play a style of Suicide Black, life gain to life loss strategy. I prefer more like value town decks like Korvold and Yarok, which generate value from doing like normal game things like sacrifice and playing creatures. So this is a different, fresh style of gameplay to me, and honestly, I think it's really powerful and can be really fun to play with. Does it play well? Yeah, it does. I mean, you pay a ton of life, you gain a ton of life, you draw a ton of cards, you kill your opponents with demons. What's not to love? Honestly. And it's mono black, so the mana base isn't too expensive. I say that, but the mana base is like $200, but that's not my fault. It kind of is. Anyway, total price is $572.19 with TCG Player optimized pricing, accounting for the lowest priced cards there are. Not the cheapest deck ever, I'll admit it, but also not the most expensive. I'd say it's mid-range price for a strong commander deck. Obviously, there's lots of ways you can get the price down. Cheaper board wipes, cheaper lands, definitely gets the price down a lot. So there's a lot of ways to get the price down if you're not comfortable with paying this much for this deck. Alright, thank you guys for watching this video. After a couple month hiatus, my Patreon is now online again. You can support me at tiers of $1, $6, $10, and $15 at the moment. It would be seriously appreciated. You also do get super cool rewards, including me opening packs for you and then sending what you opened to you. So that's extremely, extremely nice. And also it helps support the channel. It allows me to do more pack openings in general. It allows me to buy more cards to test out commander decks. And it allows me to get people together to play commander games with them, to upload gameplay videos, which I plan to do more of in the near future. Anyway, thank you guys for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe for more deck techs and pack openings. And as I said, go check out the Patreon. It'll be worth your while. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you later.